Good evening. Welcome to the Skirball Cultural Center's partnership with the League of Women Voters of Los Angeles to present an overview of the ballot propositions facing California voters on the November 2020 ballot. I am Adele Lander-Burke. I'm Vice President of Public Programs at the Skirball Cultural Center. As election season neared, I knew who to reach out to provide California voters with much needed nonpartisan information so that we could decipher the propositions free of TV, radio, print ads, and internet. The League of Women Voters encourages us to be informed and active participants in the political process. The Skirball Cultural Center is inspired by the democratic ideals of freedom and equality, and we believe the best way to exercise our rights as Americans is to be informed voters when we go to the polls. In addition to this evening's program, I invite you to visit our website to view our digital exhibition, The Official, Unofficial Voting Station, Voting for All Who Legally Can't. It is done by artist and activist Aram Han Cifuentes, and I encourage you all to go take a look at it. It really gets you thinking about who gets to vote, who doesn't get to vote, and it made me ask the question, why do so many people not vote? So please go take a look at it. The Skirball also is an official LA County voting center from October 24th through November the 3rd. You can find more information at our website. It is now my great pleasure to introduce Marilu Guevara. She is the Executive Director of the League of Women Voters of Los Angeles, and she will welcome you to this evening's program with a message about the work of the League of Women Voters. Welcome, Marilu.
Thank you, Adele, and thank you to everybody who's with us tonight and to the Skirball Center. The League of Women Voters of Los Angeles is a nonpartisan political organization that encourages informed and active participation in government, works to increase the understanding of major public policy issues, and influences public policy through education and advocacy. We're a membership organization that empowers voters like you to lead ballot measure presentations, voter registration drives, host and moderate candidate forums, and bring to life civil discourse, especially now when it's needed the most. We hope that today's program not only informs you about the ballot, but also inspires you to join and volunteer your local League of Women Voters, or even the Los Angeles League if you're joining us from Los Angeles. Now on to tonight's program. Tonight, our speaker will be sharing with you the pros and cons on the California ballot measures. Everything you hear tonight has been researched by dozens of league experts and volunteers. It is nonpartisan information. There will be no recommendations or biased information. You can trust that we're giving you just the facts. Our speaker tonight, and I'm happy to introduce our speaker, is Mona Field, who is co-president of the League of Women Voters of Los Angeles. Mona is a former political science professor at Glendale Community College. She was elected to the LA Community College District to serve as a member of the governing board. Mona has facilitated countless of workshops and panels for the Faculty Association of California Community Colleges, the Community College League of California, and the California Study Center, among many more organizations that she's participated in. She's obviously a member of our board and a member of the Los Angeles Leadership Academy. She's also a board member of the Foundation for the LA Community College District. Mona is also an author of a best-selling college textbook, California Government and Politics Today, which is now in its 15th edition. Thank you so much for joining us today, and now I would like to present Mona Field.
Good evening, everyone. We're going to begin a presentation, and I just want to mention there's a lot of information going to come at you for about 51 minutes. You might want to take notes. You will be able to put questions into the Q&A function, and after the full presentation, we will have people assisting me to find out what the questions are, and I'll answer as many as we have time for. So thank you again. We're going to begin the PowerPoint now. Thank you so much. We're going to move right into this. And please remember that you can always put a question into the chat room or Q&A function. And let's get going. First of all, in this year of COVID, there's a lot of people asking, how do I vote safely? How do I make sure my vote is counted? And I'm going to share my personal opinion based on a lot of data from our county registrar and our Secretary of State. I'm recommending, again, personal opinion, that the safest place to vote is at home. And if you choose to do that, every single Californian will be mailed a mail ballot. You will receive it if you are registered at your current address. There will be vote centers. There'll be nearly 800 in LA County, and they will take precautions, but I prefer to vote at home. Now, how can you make sure that you vote and your ballot is counted promptly? You can use the United States Postal Service. I would recommend, if you do that, that you mail by October 20. Be sure, if you are putting together your mail ballot, that you put it correctly in the envelope, you sign the outside of the envelope, and make sure it's done right. That will save some trouble for you. You can mail it, or you may have noticed already that all over the county, in front of libraries, community centers, in parks, there are special drop boxes, and they're very large and very secure. And you will find when you get your ballot that they list the 3 closest drop boxes. And those drop boxes will be picked up every 3 days. And if you wish to skip the mail, you can find a drop box and make sure your signed ballot goes in. You'll also be able to track the progress of your ballot, just like a package you would track. And the link is here, and it'll be on our last slide again. So jot it down. Be sure you're taking notes as we go. Now, in terms of our league presentation, where we give you the pros and cons about ballot measures, and of course, we never support or oppose a candidate, there's a lot of official information coming, and there's a lot of not official information coming into your home. Be sure you know what is the official mail that comes from the Secretary of State or the county registrar, where you have facts and information, and be careful with what I like to call junk mail. The junk mail is going to be full of persuasion, but not information. And you will even notice in your junk mail, it'll say, it'll sound like something that is so benign and wonderful and mom and apple pie, but you got to look to the fine print, get out that magnifying glass, and look for who paid for it. And thanks to some very strict laws here in California, we actually can find out who's paying for the junk mail and the propaganda that's coming through your mail. Now today, we're going to look at 12 state propositions and 1 LA County proposition. And they're grouped not in order of what's on your ballot, but rather by subject matter and ones that are related to each other. So as you go through whatever you have in front of you, your sample ballot, your guide from the Secretary of State, whatever you have, keep in mind we are going to kind of jump around in terms of the sequence based on the issues involved. We're starting with Prop 15, and this one, the official title has to do with increasing funding for schools, community colleges, local government. And it's a initiative, meaning it got there by people gathering signatures. And just a refresher, this is a property tax change. This is to change Prop 13. And back to the old days before Prop 13, your county collected property tax. That is still true. And the taxes were based on the current value of the property, whether it was a home, an office building, Dodger Stadium, Disneyland. And what happened when we passed Prop 13 was we said nothing will be reassessed until a change of ownership. Many of you are familiar with that concept if you have bought or sold a home in these 50 years since Prop 13, 40 years, excuse me. So what happened, of course, right away is there were a lot of cuts in our schools and our local services. Now, Prop 15 is an effort to change one part of Prop 13, that is property tax law in California. And it's going to do something, it'll sound like a deli sandwich. It's a split roll. And what that is homes and residences remain as they are. No reassessment until sale. But large commercial properties that are worth over $3 million will be reassessed every 3 years so that their taxes will be at current market value. The impact is pretty big. Prop 15, if it passes by simple majority, will produce, they say, in the billions of dollars, somewhere between 6 and almost 12 billion per year. Those taxes collected by the counties will go to local government, police, fire, parks, senior services, youth programs, street cleaning, libraries, and for our schools. K-14 means K-12 and community colleges. And the counties would be given money to implement this new reassessment of large corporate property. Now we've got some arguments for and against. I'm not going to read any of this to you. The most important slide sometimes is the one that we'll come to in a moment, which tells you who's paying for what in terms of the propaganda, the for and against. And of course, those in favor just simply point out how much we need to improve our schools, our community services, and that this Prop 15 does continue to protect homeowners and farms and small businesses. Of course, those who oppose are quite correct, pointing out it'll be the largest tax increase in the history of California. And the fear is that those large corporations, upon having a much higher property tax, might pass the costs on to consumers. I should point out that we're talking about things like Disneyland, which has been paying property tax for 40 plus years as if it is still valued or assessed at the 1976 levels. That's the whole core of this proposition, is around the need to reassess large corporate property. Now you get to see where the money is coming from. And as you would imagine, the supporters, and by the way, these numbers are probably way higher than what you see here because the money is continuing to be spent every day. These numbers are at this point a few weeks old. And you can see the contributors supporting this are the teachers, the public employees, state employees, union, and the con is heavily funded by the business community, which of course prefers not to have their taxes go up. So that's Prop 15. I leave it to you to do your homework. Let's look at Prop 19, which is a very different change to our property tax law. This was put on the ballot by the legislature, although it did begin with signature gathering, and it's too complicated to explain why it transitioned. And you notice it has a very appealing title. And let's look at what this really does. Prop 19. Here's the current situation. If you are a homeowner over 55 and you want to move, you sell your home and you move to another home. Right now, if you move to another home in certain counties, you can keep your old property tax, which is an enormous benefit since you may have bought that house decades ago. Your tax is based on the 1976 value, but your new home might cost quite a bit more. So you get to keep that old property tax. And if we pass our homes, our property to our heirs, and they rent it out or live in it, either way, they keep the low property tax. What Prop 19 would do is to allow homeowners to sell a home, relocate within California, not just select counties, anywhere in the state, and keep the original property tax. So they can keep that very low tax no matter where they go in the state and whether their new home is valued quite a bit more than their former home. It also has a very appealing element, which is that if we pass our property to our heirs, if they make it a rental, they then will be reassessed for the current value taxes. If they live in it, they get the benefit of the old low tax. And the final sweetener for Prop 19 is it promises that the taxes will be for a very important California issue, which is wildfire protection. The impact is actually not clear with this one because no one knows how many older people will take advantage and sell a house and retain their old tax, whether inherited homes will become rentals or not. It's not that clear whether there would be a huge fiscal change for our state. It would certainly benefit older homeowners who choose to take advantage. Here's our for and against. This clearly benefits older homeowners, and it would add needed resources to our firefighting programs. The primary opposition argument is that this will tend to increase the inequality, the economic inequality between the older generation, many of whom are fortunate to be homeowners, and the young people. This doesn't do anything to help them. In all honesty, it does not help them buy homes. It does not increase the number of homes built. So there are the two sides. Let's look at the funding. The supporters, and in fact, those who put this on the ballot originally, the California Association of Realtors, and for obvious reasons, they would love to have more homes turn over and be sold and bought. That's their industry. And a little bit of money from the firefighters. And what's interesting here is the opponents have not raised enough money to even register on our Fair Political Practices Commission website. There are opponents. For example, the Los Angeles Times opposes Prop 19, and the ACLU opposes Prop 19, but they're not putting any money in. So there you go, another change in property tax law. Please continue to read and think as you determine how to vote. One more that impacts housing in California is Prop 21. And this one came to us through signature gathering, and this is what I call one of the repeats. It's very similar to one that we did not support 2 years ago. The way it is now, and this has happened in these last 2 years since we defeated the last statewide rent control measure, California already has 2 statewide rent control laws signed by Governor Newsom. and about half of the renters in California benefit from those. Current law does limit the ability of local cities and counties to create or amend their current rent control. About a dozen cities in California have rent control, not very many, out of about 1,000 cities. Rent control currently can only be applied to buildings built 1995 or before. So nothing built since then can be under rent control. Prop 21 would change that issue of the timing. It would expand the rent control to buildings built after 1955. But just to be clear, it doesn't impose it on the whole state. It simply gives an opportunity for cities and counties to create rent control laws, because under the Costa-Hawkins law of 1995, there were very limited opportunities to make rent control. So it opens up an opportunity, but it doesn't impose rent control. It kind of, in a way, you would say it's a local control option. And the fiscal impact is one of these. It depends. It depends on cities and counties, whether they make new rent control laws or change their current ones. It depends on whether landlords end up wanting to sell because they feel they won't make as much money off their rental properties. And the only clear impact is that if local governments, the number of local governments that expand rent control increases, then that will save renters money. That's kind of the most clear benefit, but that's to individuals, not to the pocketbook of our government. The arguments for and against, lots of concern that we have increasing homelessness when people are forced out by increased rents, and that it does guarantee a fair return for landlords. The arguments against would be that this is a government interference with what should be a market decision, supply and demand, and that potentially the more rent control there is, the more developers may shy away from creating housing. We do have interesting dollar figures. The primary proponent is the same organization that brought us the proposition last time, the AIDS Healthcare Foundation, based here in Los Angeles. And the opposition is primarily organizations that represent apartment owners and quite a few other property owners, large property owners, obviously rental property owners. And there you have it. We're done with anything related to housing or property taxes. Now we'll look at propositions that have to do with voting rights. And we have two. Thankfully, they're a little simpler than some of those property tax and rent control propositions. Prop 17 was put on the ballot by our state legislature, and it's a relatively simple choice. It would simply allow people who have been incarcerated in state prison, meaning they were convicted of a felony, that after they leave prison, the change would be that right now they cannot vote again till they leave prison, complete parole, and then they get their vote if they go through some paperwork while on probation. That's the current situation. Prop 17 would simply say that as soon as you leave prison, while on parole, which can last several years, that you could vote again. And that's the big change. It, in other words, returns the right to vote to those who have been incarcerated sooner rather than after they complete parole. The fiscal impact is relatively minor. There'd be a change on the voter registration forms, and there might be a little cost to the counties because they'd have new voters to process. The pro and con are quite simple. People who are concerned about restorative justice and rehabilitation believe that if you've done your time, the minute you're out, you're on parole, you have requirements, but you should be able to vote. And the no side, of course, would say the parole is an extension of the sentence and that we should not allow people to vote until they complete that piece of their return to the community. Nobody has raised enough money to show up on any official documents on Prop 17. It's not a big money issue. Now, Prop 18 is also involving voting rights. Again, relatively simple. Right now, when young people get ready to vote, they can register while they're 17, but they cannot vote until their birthday. They have to be 18 on the date of the election or after, and so a 17-year-old can never vote. However, Prop 18 would allow 17-year-olds to vote in the primary election, which normally will be in the springtime, that precedes the general November election that will occur on or after they turn 18. In other words, let's say the kid's birthday is August, they're going to be 18, there's an election in November, they would be permitted, even though they're 17, to vote in, let's say, that March or April or June primary. That's the change. Very minor increased costs to have more people vote. The counties need to send materials to the new voters, however many there would be. And the pro and con, again, this is one of those sort of civic engagement. Let's make sure our youth get involved voting as soon as possible. Let's give them that opportunity to be part of a primary, which does determine who will be on that November ballot. And the con, mostly concerned with the maturity of teenagers. I leave you to make your personal decision. And this is another one where nobody's spending a lot of money. Now, we switch to Prop 16. This one, again, put on the ballot by our lawmakers in Sacramento rather recently. And this one it's one of those ones where it revises something we did about 20 years ago. What we did 20 years ago is we passed Prop 209, which basically outlawed any kind of affirmative action, any kind of consideration of race, sex, gender, et cetera, when we admit students to the UC system, when we give public employment, and so on. In other words, we disallowed affirmative action as a part of our decision-making in these major public opportunities. Prop 16 would reverse Prop 209 and once again make it possible for our public agencies to consider those diversity factors when we hire public employees, admit students to our public universities, and when people are given contracts to provide a service to any public agency. There are no direct effects on government. There's no cost to implementing this. The arguments for and against, probably familiar to most of you. People favor this. They will tend to say that we need to continue to improve access to opportunity for underrepresented groups or groups who have been victims of systematic oppression, racism, discrimination. And the no side tends to point out that there are certain minority ethnic communities that already tend to be well represented in higher ed, for example, and concern about the whole thing about government contracts going to businesses that aren't truly minority owned, but have a sort of token minority. Two very opposing views of how we handle the history in this country of our racial and ethnic differences. Here we go on the money. There's some names that, well, there's one name that I personally do not know who this is, Quinn Delaney, someone who apparently is very passionate about opening options for groups that have been historically underrepresented. And you have the nurses, you have the California teachers, Kaiser Foundation, and on the no side, they haven't raised enough money to register. Leave you to your deliberations. We'll move on. Prop 20. Now we're moving into the issues of criminal justice and reforms and changes to laws governing what crimes are most important and so forth. This was put on the ballot by signature gathering. And let's talk about the way it is. Over the last decade or so, voters in California have supported propositions 47 and 57 that have reduced the definitions of certain crimes, reduced the supervision or parole levels of those released from prison, and was believed to be a form of criminal justice reform, according to those who support it. Prop 20 would reverse some of those changes, and it could certainly result in more people being sent to prison or staying longer in prison. In effect, it's a bit of a return to a more tough on crime approach. It changes some of the definitions of what nonviolent crime is. It does change some definitions around what kind of theft is a felony versus misdemeanor. To be honest, it's very complicated, and I urge you all to read the material in your official state voter guide, because I can only give such a brief summary. The fiscal impact, it would impact several thousand individuals per year, and it could certainly cost more in terms of prison costs and parole costs. The arguments for and against, those who favor it have some very clear crimes on a list that they feel need to be listed as violent as opposed to nonviolent. There's some support for this around the idea that serial theft, which usually is shoplifting, repeated shoplifting, will be treated more seriously than it is at this time. Those who oppose it are concerned about the increased costs for prisons and that it promotes discrimination against low-income people of color, and it takes us back. That if our goal is restorative justice and less incarceration, we would be a no vote on this. And here you go with the money. You can see that this has been brought to you by the Professional Prison Guard Association, the deputy sheriffs of LA County, and other law enforcement unions and groups. And some of the grocery stores have gotten involved around the issue of the shoplifting. And on the con side, there's a number of individuals donating in large amounts. And you probably recognize the name Chan Zuckerberg and the ACLU of Northern California. Another related to the criminal justice system is Prop 25. Prop 25 is another one where we would reverse a law that has already been passed. In this case, our legislature and governor in 2018 decided to end cash bail in California. And the way it is now, we have cash bail. If you're arrested, you, depending on the type of crime you're accused of, will typically be required to post bail to ensure that you show up in court for your trial, which could be months away from your actual date of arrest. If you can't raise the money, you could be jailed in county jail waiting for a trial. In other words, you're not guilty yet, but you're in jail because you couldn't raise the money. Every county has its bail schedule, and those costs depend on the severity of the crime, the history of the accused, and all the kind of obvious factors. Prop 25 would eliminate cash bail. It would require the courts, instead of cash, to assess the individual and the risk of releasing them versus the risk of letting them go home and show up for their trial. It's sort of what you may have heard. It's kind of like released on your own recognizance, meaning no bail, we believe you, you'll come back for your trial. Fiscal impact could increase some costs because the courts, instead of just a number, you've got to provide bail of X amount, would have to go through a risk assessment process. It could reduce some costs, the cost of having people in jail who are unable to post the bail. And I'm quoting the state voter guide, we don't really know the fiscal impact. Now, here we go, arguments for and against. Well, as you can only imagine, cash bail does make it easier for the affluent to, go home while they wait for their trial. And sometimes innocent people who cannot raise bail plead guilty. They plea bargain just so they don't have to sit in jail. And that can create a record for them and cause a lot of problems. The no side is interesting. It's a bit of a mixed bag. Opposition comes from both the left and the right. Interestingly, the sort of more left wing, if you want to say that, opposition says that this risk assessment algorithm could actually be racially biased, and it's not a good idea. And more on the conservative side, you see the concern about a new bureaucracy that costs taxpayer dollars. When we look at the money, we see a wealthy couple, the Balmers, who do not live in California, they live in the state of Washington, have put in a substantial amount in favor of this. And the no side is primarily funded by the bail bond companies. Obviously, their industry would collapse if this passes. And interestingly, in terms of the sort of the no side being a mixed bag, California Republican Party opposes it, and so does the Human Rights Watch, which is not normally associated with conservative issues. Moving along, more controversy and complexity. Prop 22, now we're looking at things that have to do with labor and business. We have a couple of these. You have probably already gotten a lot of propaganda in the mail about this one. It was put on the ballot by signature gathering, and it's about whether people who work, primarily those employed by the drive-share companies, Lyft and Uber, will be full employees with benefits or quasi-employees with modest benefits. The way it is now, our legislature passed a law, AB 5, which makes it so that rideshare drivers and a lot of other types of workers who have traditionally been independent contractors will be treated as full employees with all the benefits of employees. And what happened is the rideshare companies, the two big ones, tried to stop the new law through courts. They lost in court, so they said, okay, let's take it to the voters. And what this proposition would do is it would reverse that state law and continue to have the drivers, it's mostly about those drivers, be independent, however, with some benefits. They will get some of the normal employee benefits, but not all. And that's the main focus of Prop 22. There's almost no fiscal impact. This is all have to do with the industry. That's not the big issue here. It's really the issue of who favors it, who opposes it, and let's look at that. Prop 22 gives drivers a chance to be better treated while maintaining their independence. That's a pro point of view. And something you may have heard is if they were true employees with all the costs associated for the companies, that it would cost more to use the ride shares, that would impact consumers of rideshare services. The no side points out that this is not adequate because all workers, drivers and others, have to be full employees with the proper benefits. And the no side points out that this was put on the ballot and paid for by the corporations and their profit motive. Let's look at the money. Well, I'm going to just be quiet for a minute and let you absorb this. I think you can get a sense of who's for this, who's against it, and your mailbox is going to tell you, because I will bet that you will get multiple versions of the yes position paid for by the people you see listed here under 4. I shouldn't say people, by the corporations. And you will probably, given that the dollar amounts are quite a bit lower, you'll get a lot less propaganda for the no side. I leave it to you. It's kind of a standard labor versus business kind of choice. Here's another one that people might say, but this is a healthcare proposition. Why have you got it in there with the labor issues? Well, there's an interesting story. And by the way, this is another repeat. We had this on the ballot, a version of it, different but very similar, 2 years ago. We defeated it, we the voters. Here's how it is now. People who need dialysis, and that means they have some serious health challenges, they're under the care of their doctor, but usually for the actual dialysis, they go to a clinic and there is not necessarily a doctor on duty at all times, because the clinics are, the care given is managed by health technicians and nurses. The clinics are owned by 2 very major corporations, and frankly, the employees of those clinics have been unsuccessful in becoming unionized. Those are the pieces of the puzzle you need to know. Prop 23 would require that every clinic has a doctor on duty at all times, and that means a doctor is there, possibly not having a lot to do, but sort of there. And it also would require these clinics to report to the California Public Health Department if they wish to close. And that's because last time the clinics, often in their argument against that proposition 2 years ago, were threatening to close if they had to do what the proposition required. So here's the fiscal. These corporate clinics, it would cost them more. Obviously, they'd be paying a doctor to be there all the time. That could ripple to the insurers and patients. Some clinics may say, we can't stay in business. And if those patients end up in public hospitals or emergency rooms because their clinic closed, there would be increased public cost. Here are arguments. The 4 is that this protects patients, making sure a doctor is there, and prevents the clinics from closing without actually going through a process with the state. The no side, which I'm sure you may already be seeing some of the propaganda, is going to talk about the fact that the increased cost is unnecessary because every patient is under the supervision of their doctor, even though their doctor isn't there every time they go for dialysis, and it could increase costs. And here you go. I will be quiet and let you absorb who's putting the money in to get it on the ballot, the pro, and who's putting the money in to defeat it. I don't think I have to say more. I leave you to your conclusions. And also to read everything you can, pro and con, before you vote. Here's one of those propositions that honestly, I think it's unfair to us voters to have to deal with the complexity of this Prop 24. Consumer privacy laws. Very few of us are experts. As it is now, we do have a California Privacy Act. And of course, this is about our privacy whenever we're on our computers, which is more than ever for so many of us. And we have some protections. How many of us pay attention when that little warning pops up about cookies and what they can share? I don't know. But we do have a law that actually is the first in the nation to deal with computer privacy. Prop 24 would change some of our current law, and it has so many complex elements. I'm just showing you a few of them, and I deeply encourage you to do more thinking and reading, because again, this is beyond the expertise of most of us. One thing we can all understand is it would set up a whole new state agency to monitor these issues. The costs involve mostly the new state agency, has to have employees, has to have a governing body, and so forth. And depending on how this plays out, you know, this is the stuff that's in the court constantly. Anything about high tech and computers and privacy could clog our courts, but we don't know how much it will cost. The proponents, and I will show you momentarily the one major proponent who paid for all this, just want to, quote, strengthen our current laws and create a special agency. And the opponents feel this is a giveaway to the technology industry and that we already have a really good privacy law. Here you go, take a look. And as you can see, the opponents have the money. The supporters have the money, and the opponents don't have enough money to show up. Take a good look at all the mail and read. And I want to remind you, and you'll excuse me, this proposition is a great example. If you think it's too confusing, you can skip it. You don't have to vote on everything on your ballot. We're almost done. Prop 14. Here's one that involves a very emotional issue about medical research for a lot of serious diseases. This is a repeat, although it's been a while. The last time we voted to fund a state-sponsored stem cell research institute was in 2004. And basically the money is gone. The money is spent, billions of dollars of our tax dollars have been distributed to a variety of research institutions. And what is happening is the same gentleman who put that on the ballot in 2004 is now putting this on the ballot to give more money, more tax money. Basically, it authorizes borrowing, and like all public borrowing, it's paid back over quite a long time with interest by us, the taxpayers, and that it would continue the flow of funds for the research to find cures for a variety of very serious illnesses. The fiscal impact is it comes out of our state general fund, and that the institutes will continue to, they have competitive grants to get money. They will build more labs. A lot of the money's been spent on buildings. They will train scientists and pay the other costs of this research. For and against. Obviously, the for is, well, we would like to find cures, wouldn't we, for these terrible diseases, and that stem cell research is a source of potential eventual cures. The no side is simply that this is no longer necessary. This now is being done at the federal level and in other states. The original impetus was that at that time, the federal government prohibited this kind of research. Now that doesn't exist. So, you know, in other words, the no argument is saying we don't have to do this anymore, California. That research is going on all over. And there is some concern that there's not enough public oversight of the agency that runs this. It's set up with a board, and that there's actually a fair amount of conflict of interest going on. And again, I leave you to look at the money. And between the dollars flowing into the yes side and the very sort of heart-wrenching appeals to our goodwill to defeat disease, you can see there's an edge there for the proponents. Opponents include the LA Times, came out with a very long editorial, and I'm not even aware of other formal opposition. Finally, we're done with the state. We're almost done. This is our last one. County of Los Angeles. Alternatives to incarceration, charter amendment, and put on our ballot by our Board of Supervisors just this past summer, very recently. This would require the county to allocate 10% of the budget for community and social services. The people in favor say this tends to support services that include everything from youth job programs, health care, education, a lot of services that it is hoped by those in favor will keep people out of the courts and out of the jails. That it's an alternative to incarceration approach to our county spending. The opponents worry that this locks in the budget and that someday that 10% might be needed for other very urgent needs. The supporters here include a coalition, Reimagine LA, the county Democrats, one of our most major unions, Unite Here. The opponents come from those who fear that in reducing the overall county budget, that there will be cuts for our sheriffs and our jails. And you see here the County Federation of Labor in opposition, in part because some of those organizations are unions. The ALADS, the Association of LA Deputy Sheriffs, is a union. I'm sorry to say there's no money information because the county does not provide the kind of web internet information that the state does about who's spending what. So I don't have who's spending what on Measure J. Final slide is just some useful websites. I want to point out that for unbiased pro and con, votersedge.org, that's from our League of Women Voters. If you want the League's actual recommendations, there's the link for the recommendations. The League, California League currently has positions on about half of our state propositions. You can track your ballot and make sure that that ballot that you dropped in a box or mailed is getting where it's supposed to. And I do apologize, that's a little cut off at the bottom, but if you Google California Fair Political Practices Commission and you really want to know about all that money and who's spending it, you'll find that website. Thank you so much. We're going to move directly to Q&A, and we'll see what you want to ask, and I'll do my best to answer. Thank you again.
Hello, everybody. I hope you found that useful. It's a lot. Before I hear from my wonderful support team to read some of the questions that people have put, there were some very early questions, just some clarification I think important. First of all, your ballot, if you are dropping it in a box or mailing it in a timely manner, it will be among the first to be counted on election night. The mail ballots and drop ballots will be processed when they are received, meaning they'll validate signatures and so on, but nothing will be counted till the election is over. However, all the mail and drop box ballots are among the first to be counted. If you vote in person, your ballot won't be counted as quickly. The other question is, what if you did forget to sign or date or put your address? The county will contact you. They will mail a letter to the address on record, and you will have time to deal with it. But of course, that implies that you're getting it mailed or put in the drop box early enough for any errors to be caught. So I just want to assure you, the county of LA wants your vote. They're going to do everything they can to be sure you're counted. And then one other thing, a couple other quick things. All of the state propositions passed by a simple majority. They need 50% plus one of the votes cast for that proposition. And another very general thing, I did not indicate the position of the League of Women Voters on any of these. If you're interested, that would be the website that is LWVC.org. That's the California League, and they do have recommendations on about half of the state measures. So just to clear up some of the general questions. Now I want to go to, I'm not sure if it's Maddie or Marie Lou or Penny, but somebody tell me some questions, please.
Hi, Mona. This is Mary Lou. I'll start off with Proposition 15, and then I'll pass it to one of my colleagues for Proposition 19. Does that work?
Perfect.
For Proposition 15, we received 3 questions. The first one being, will Proposition 15 ever be changed to apply to homeowners and raise their taxes?
No, just to be clear, a proposition once passed is the new law, in this case, state constitutional amendment. It would take another ballot proposition to change the rules for homeowners regarding your property tax.
Perfect, thank you. Second question is there a fear that businesses will leave the state even more than passing the cost onto consumers?
I understand the question. You know, of course, the business community often threatens to leave. you know, when it comes to things like Disneyland, Universal Studios, it seems unlikely that they'll relocate out of state. I suppose there could be a much smaller business that feels they'll relocate due to their property tax increase, and there's just no way of knowing for sure whether that will happen. But it is a common threat of the corporate world whenever they're asked to pay more taxes.
Okay, perfect. Regarding Prop 15, and this is the last question that we received in the chat, is Prop 15 is basically a tax increase. Why does it not take 2/3 to pass?
Well, that's a very good question. If it were a local tax increase, it would take 2/3. But a state constitutional amendment through our direct democracy, state proposition is a simple majority. That's the way our state constitution has defined the measures on our state ballot.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much. I'm going to now tag my colleague Penny Summers for Prop 19.
Okay, sorry, it took me a little time to unmute myself. So we had some questions about Proposition 19. Would Proposition 19 be retroactive as to inherited homes that are rented out now?
No, Prop 19, if it passes, will take effect in February of 2021, which I think suggests that if you are the heir, you inherited the home and you live there or rent it at this time, nothing changes. However, just for clarity, if it passes by that simple majority, starting February of next year, the inherited home, here's the two options. If the family member lives in it, the property tax will stay low. It will be at the value that the deceased parent or grandparent was paying. If the heir chooses to rent the home, that's when it will be reassessed on the grounds that if that property tax is extremely low, that the heirs could be renting it at current market value and making quite a bit more each month than the annual property tax bill. That's what that change is in Prop 19.
Thank you. Now, what about homes valued at over $1 million, even if you live in the inherited property?
Right, and that's one of those, details of Prop 19. The way it would work if it passes is you inherit the home and you live in it, but that home is worth 1 million or more above that assessed value based on, the deceased property tax rate. At that point, there would be some reassessment. However, the heir living in the home would still benefit. It would be a bit of a hybrid property tax. It wouldn't go to the current market value. It would be a bit of a blend of the low tax based on inheritance and the fact that it's worth so much more than it was when your parent bought it.
Okay, the last question for Proposition 19 was, does it a yes on Proposition 19 eliminate the ability for parents to pass on their property to their kids without reassessment of property taxes? This seems like the main reason to vote no. If true, it takes away Proposition 13 related protections by increasing the taxes. Is that correct?
Yeah, no, let me clarify again.
Okay.
If passed, means that the inherited home, if lived in by the heirs, will retain the low property tax. If it is used as a rental by the heirs, then it will be reassessed. That is a change. That's the change, but it does depend how the home is used. And of course, if the heirs sell the home, then it doesn't matter. They're not paying the tax anymore. The new owners are paying it. So I hope that answers that question.
And we had one last minute question about Prop 19. Doesn't Prop 19 make more houses available? So why wouldn't it help the housing shortage?
It will potentially, if a lot of senior citizens decide that they're going to move because they will, you know, be able to move 3 times in anywhere in California. Right now, remember, if you're over 55, you can move once to certain counties in our state and retain your low tax. This would enable it to be 3 times in a lifetime to anywhere in California. And yes, it will create turnover in the market, but it won't produce any additional housing. So turnover on today's market values, it will benefit affluent, perhaps younger people who can afford today's homes. It does not expand the housing stock. It doesn't increase the number of homes available.
Okay, I'm going to pass this on to Maddie.
Thank you.
Okay, so we had back to Prop 15, if we could jump back really quick, we had a question relating to 15 and 21. So Prop 15 taxes property at higher levels, yet Prop 21 permits rent control. Therefore, there is no way to pass additional costs onto tenants, spreading the load to all people in the state. Is this true?
Wow, okay. Now, hang on a sec. Prop 15 has nothing to do with homes. So I'm not sure. The question may have meant regarding, for example, apartment buildings that will be reassessed. So I'm not, forgive me, I'm not quite clear on if that's what they're meaning, is that because an apartment building, if Prop 15 passes, that apartment building worth more than 3 million will be reassessed. And yes, if there is currently a rent control law as we have in certain cities, or if Prop 21 were to pass, which expands the opportunity for rent control, that is a possibility that you would have an increased property tax and not necessarily be able to pass it on to the tenants. I guess that is a possibility. Obviously, there's a lot of variables in that scenario.
Thank you. Okay, and for Proposition 21, just a clarifying question. The moderator says Prop 21 expands rent control to properties built in the last 15 years. The ballot says the opposite. Which one is correct?
Okay, I'm gonna double check. I'm pretty sure I have that correct. Let's see, Prop 21, and I am looking in our official document from our Secretary of State. It says that, again, this is based on localities passing rent control. This isn't going to make statewide rent control. This is going to open the option so cities can either expand their rent control to include properties more recently constructed. Right now, no city's rent control can apply to anything built after 1995, I believe it is. But if Prop 21 were to pass and cities were to take advantage of the new opportunity, what I'm reading on page 52, if somebody wants to double check, that currently rent control cannot apply to newly built housing built on or before February 1st, 1995. But if Prop 21 were to pass, it would actually change that to the year 2006. So things built between 1995 and 2006 could be under rent control if cities choose to make rent control or revise their current. I'm quite sure of that. Okay. Sometimes it's confusing because the background is the current situation. It's not what the proposition does. It can be very confusing.
Okay, thank you. That's all the questions we have for Prop 21, so I could pass it back to Mary Lou for Proposition 16.
Thank you so much, Maddie. We're on to Proposition 16, Mona. We had a couple of questions. The first one is, isn't the 17-year-old allowed to vote in the special election, not just the primary?
Yes, correct. If there were a special election in the spring or summer, yes, they can vote in both those. Obviously, my presentation is a summary. It doesn't cover every detail.
Okay, perfect. Second question is, does Prop 16 take only a simple majority to pass?
All state propositions take a simple majority, correct.
Perfect. And the last question is, does Prop 16 make it possible, or will it require such diversity considerations?
No, it becomes an option. It is not mandated. It becomes an option for the public agencies, the UCs, and so forth. It is not a mandate.
Okay, and that was it for Prop 16. I don't think we have any more questions, so I'll pass it on to Penny for Proposition 22.
Okay, that 22, that hot button issue. So Proposition 22, is this just drivers or other people on 1099 independent contractors who are also quasi-employees?
It only applies to the rideshare and the delivery service drivers. It was put on the ballot and written by Lyft and Uber, and it applies only to the people in that industry, not to other kinds of freelancers or independent contractors.
Okay, the next question. If Proposition 22 passes and requires employers to give benefits, can employers fire workers if they don't want to provide the benefits?
Well, to clarify, Prop 22 is put on the ballot by the employers, by Lyft and Uber, and it has what I would call partial employee benefits. In other words, Lyft and Uber apparently realized that they couldn't put a proposition on saying, we don't want to do anything for our drivers. They knew that might not work. So they put it on so that they could give some benefits to drivers, but not as many or the complete employee benefit opportunity of our current state law. So it will give some benefits, and they wrote it that way. So presumably the question might be best if it fails and they must give all their drivers the full benefits. In other words, if people vote no on Prop 22 by a majority, if the no vote is the majority, then those companies will be forced to make all those drivers full employees. And that's when perhaps they will choose to have fewer of those. We don't really know what will happen, I'll be honest. I mean, the companies have kind of threatened to raise rates, or in one case, they kind of threatened to leave the state completely. You know, some of these propositions have either completely unpredictable outcomes or sometimes what we call unintended consequences. We don't actually know until it happens what the results will be.
Okay, and the last question for this one is it a supermajority needed to amend Proposition or to amend 22?
It's like every state proposition, simple majority. And obviously, if a future proposition deals with the same issues, it'll be the same thing. A state proposition is a simple majority.
Thank you. Okay, on to Maddie.
Okay, so Proposition 23, one question. Weren't the big dollars spent on getting voters to vote yes on it versus no?
No, I think someone may not have seen the slide correctly. Let me explain again. Prop 23 is about the dialysis clinics. And what we have there is that the yes is supported by the Service Employees International Union, about $5.6 million. They're kind of the David, and the Goliath is the no side, which are the for-profit corporations that run about 75% of the dialysis clinics in our state. And the corporate names are DaVita and Fresenius. They're putting in multiple millions of dollars to defeat Prop 23.
Okay, thank you. And we have one more clarifying question about Prop 15. Does Prop 15 include apartment buildings? I thought it excluded all housing.
No. Prop 15 excludes or will not change the property taxes for private homes, you know, single family homes. And it will change an apartment building worth more than 3 million would be reassessed along with an industrial or other. In other words, that's a commercial property. So Prop 15, the protected group under Prop 15, if it were to pass by a majority, will be, you know, single family homeowners. There will be no change for those people. And I guess potentially, I'll give an example. Let's say someone owns a duplex and they rent half and they live in half. And if it's worth less than 3 million, you know, and I think, I'm not sure where the cutoff is, I'll be honest. I don't know at what number of units the cutoff is, but commercial property would certainly be large apartment complexes. They would be reassessed.
Okay, thank you.
We have, just to clarify, we have a few minutes left for questions. So whatever you ladies deem to be the most commonly asked question.
Okay, I'll pass it back to Mary Lou for the general questions because those might be some common questions.
Thank you.
Hi, Mona. We had some general questions that came in while you were answering some of the proposition questions.
Mm-hmm.
One important question is, the sample ballot has a section for the date. That would be the outside envelope. Should the date in the boxes with the month, date, year, should you date it on top of the month, date, year letters or underneath or above it? Would you happen to know the answer on that?
You know, I'm trying to think what I did on my mail ballot. I think I wrote it on top. I think that very minute decision is nothing that would disqualify the ballot. You want to have a date on there. And to be honest, I dated mine days before I got to the drop box. So as long as the date is before you mail it or drop it, I think you're safe.
Do we have time to answer some of the questions that have been coming in just generally for some of the ballot measures?
I think we probably have about 3 minutes left before Skirball wants to close the program.
I'll go ahead and ask you one general question, and then I'll pick one from those that have come in regarding the propositions. One is, I guess, there was a question regarding what's been in the news regarding the fake drop boxes. Is there anything in terms of guidance that you can give voters who will be using or who would want to use that option of dropping their vote by mail in a box?
Right. Yes, so quite a scandal here in California. My understanding, and of course I started reading as soon as I could about what's going on. And for those who don't know, the Republican Party of California believes and claims that under our ballot gathering law or ballot harvesting law, that they can create drop-off locations, but they can't claim those are official. And my understanding is that those boxes will not look like our official ones. That if you, all I can say is the official ones, they are in most neighborhoods, and you probably by now have driven by one in front of a public library, a community center, a park, and I don't think you can be confused. I'm pretty sure that the Republican Party's, you know, boxes can't look like the real thing. It has alarmed a lot of us. It concerns us. And frankly, this will probably go to the courts because our Secretary of State is very clear. This is not legal. And the Republican Party chair, I heard him today on the radio saying, we think it is. So I recommend just be very cautious that it has the county seal, and it has warnings of that it is a felony to mess with these boxes. And if you have really a serious doubt, you still can use the US mail. We've been assured, especially if you're mailing in the next week or so, it'll get there in time. And remember, you have that website, Ballot Tracks. And I do recommend that you check your ballot. Go ahead, sign up for ballot tracks, and then you'll be able to see when it is received by the county and when it is validated and even when it is counted. I've been told we have very little time left. What is the decision? Do we have another question or are we closing off?
I think we'll do one last clarifying question, Mona, if you're okay with that.
Okay.
And it was a question regarding Prop 22. As the person understands it, it's a simple majority to pass. She believes that it requires a 7/8 majority to amend. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's a good point. Buried in the language of Prop 22 is that if the legislature wants to mess with it, amend it, they need a 7/8 majority. Now that's a very high level, and it's, you know, it should be, I suppose it's something that should be emphasized more, that even if you favor the proposition, you might be concerned that any form of implementation legislation is going to require a huge, super majority. And I thank the person who mentioned that. It's not something I've emphasized, but it is a fact. It's very unusual. And that's something that's getting written into these propositions occasionally, because even when we pass it, there sometimes are implementation details that are handled by our legislators in Sacramento. And in this case, if it passes, it's going to require an enormous number of legislators to agree to modify it in any way. I do think now, I apologize to everyone that we can't get to all the questions, but I believe that our Skirball host would like us to return the presentation to them. I thank you all. I wish you thoughtful voting and early voting.
I want to thank Mona Field and everyone from the League of Women Voters of Los Angeles. That was fantastic. There is so much to learn. I want to encourage all of you to, of course, go out and vote. And if you want further information, please go to the voter information booklet that you received probably a few weeks ago that explains everything about all of the propositions. It is separate from your sample ballot, but it will give you further information about all the propositions. Thank you, everyone. Good luck on your voting, and have a good evening. Thank you.